The 8th of December, 2004. A hush fell over the metal universe. As the music continued to rumble through the speakers at a crowded Columbus, Ohio arena, a gunshot ripped through the night, bringing an end to a legend's performance. As the lights went out and the audience gasped in shock, Dimebag Darrell, the guitar virtuoso in Pantera's soul, fell to the ground on stage. He remained vibrant and active far into old life, refusing to disappear behind the mask of fame. Tragically, he was killed while performing live music, which was his greatest passion. The cold-blooded murder that took place in front of hundreds of people did more than merely take a talented artist's life. Its aftermath was a deluge of mysteries. And who was the true murderer? Is he a crazed individual or a cog in a sinister plot? How come Dimebag was chosen? Just why was he singled out? Dimebag Darrell embodied raw metal intensity long before he became a victim of tragedy. A guy whose soul was so full of love for music that not even death could silence him, whose ability to transform each riff into a blade slashing through grief, and whose joyous presence could be felt even in the middle of mayhem. What happened to the guitar-crazed Texan who became a metal king, then fell from grace, becoming a legend? We can learn why Dimebag Darrell was more than a guitarist. He was a timeless emblem of a whole generation if we go back over the events of his short but brilliant life. Perhaps his soul lingers in the reverberations of those wailing guitars, where it roars, burns, and never, ever falls silent. Childhood and adolescence. A redhead from Arlington, Texas, Darrell Lance Abbott was born on August 20, 1966, long before he became a guitar legend in the eyes of the world. Music wasn't just a pipe dream in his little southern house. On a daily basis, he inhaled this air. Country music producer and sound engineer Jerry Abbott was his father. Darrell grew up with the melodies of guitar strings, clapping, and passionate vocals as a soundtrack that permeated his every move. Even though they were poor, the Abbott family was full of love and musical connections. In that setting, there was a kinship between Darrell and Vinnie Paul, Darrell's older brother and 3 years his senior. Vinnie was enchanted by rhythm and percussion, while Darrell couldn't get enough of guitar. Initially, he looked up to rock guitarists like Kiss's Ace Frehley and Black Sabbath's Tony Iommi. But when he heard Eddie Van Halen play, his whole perspective shifted. After that, playing guitar wasn't enough for him. He wished he could crack it up, burn down all the regulations, and remake it from the ground up. Darrell, to everyone's surprise, never enrolled in a guitar class. He learned everything on his own, finding out tremolo tricks, bends, and chords just by listening and feeling. By the time he was a teenager, he had mastered the techniques of professional guitarists and, even more astonishingly, had developed a sound all his own. When Darrell was only 15 years old, he started consistently placing first in local guitar tournaments. His cherished Dean ML guitar had a ferocious yet alluring sound that captivated crowds whenever he took the stage. The organizers finally stopped allowing him to participate after a while because no one else could have competed with him. Despite his ineligibility to consume beer, he was instead appointed to the position of judge. Darrell co-founded Pantera with Vinnie when he was 16 years old. They possessed an unusual talent that no amount of classroom instruction could have imparted, and they had the support of a record company to boot. An unshakable bond, blazing rock and roll and fire. A drummer and a guitarist were an unusual musical pairing, but they communicated perfectly through their music. Although Dimebag Darrell did not grow up in a poor or terrible household, he did have a childhood marked by intense emotion, unwavering loyalty, and an unusual kind of resolve. When you witness a weary adolescent strumming guitar till he passes out, only to break into a smile upon reaching the last chord. Do you realize this? The world is in the dark about a genius whose star is about to explode. Background: the Abbott brothers and a handful of pals started Pantera in a Texas garage in the early 80s. Dimebag, whose real name was Diamond Darrell, was a talented kid guitarist whose talent was light years ahead of his years. All they had was a burning desire to perform live, an unbreakable bond as a brotherhood, and a fevered dream of playing in front of an imaginary audience. They didn't have access to a recording studio or a spotlight from the media. Pantera originally belonged to the glam metal subgenre, which was popular in the early 2000s and was characterized by lustrous hairstyles like Rat or Mötley Crüe as well as tight leather pants. This noise was familiar to Dimebag. Metal Magic, 1983, Projects in the Jungle, 1984, and I Am the Night, 1985, were his early stamp on the band, and he wore fringed shirts and blasted through solos at lightning speed. But if you paid careful attention, you might pick up on a change, a harder, gritty riff style that hinted at a sound about to escape the shallow mold of glam. In 1987, things started to change. When Pantera's main vocals were swapped out. The band welcomed Phil Anselmo as a new lead singer, known for his snarling voice, explosive energy, and defiant nature. At that point, the once polished love ballads gave way to the unfiltered outcry of anger, resentment, and defiance from a generation that had long since passed. The guitar went from being a showpiece to an instrument in Dimebag's hands. As a weapon, it sliced through the surface and carved out a unique sound for them. On their 1988 album Power Metal, Pantera showcased their evolving sound, with glam elements that were beginning to chip away and exposing a harder, more aggressive side. Slashing rhythms, razor-sharp riffs, and skillful solos began to characterize Dimebag's approach. They went after the audience's rationality and perception. However, big record labels persisted in ignoring Pantera despite its strong roster and developing skill. Nobody gave them a second chance because they weren't marketable. Enough or Crazy Enough, they were just another half-baked glam band. Dimebag proceeded regardless of the world's readiness. Playing on any tiny platform they could find, from dusty local fairs to smoky bars, he continued recording and practicing until his fingers bled. Demanding the very most from himself and the band. A turning point in my career. Pantera emerged from their underground hiatus for nearly a decade in 1990 with The Ferocious Cowboys from Hell, an album that boldly stated their intention to revolutionize metal. The superficial flair and glitz had long since faded. Phil Anselmo's fierce, uncompromising growl replaced it, along with hammering drum beats and razor-sharp guitars. Dimebag Darrell was the storm's eye. He transformed the stage into a battleground and his guitar into a weapon by playing each note as if it were a stab at reality. The LP was laid down in Dimebag's dad's studio, Pantera Sound Studio. Surrounded by beer cans and the reverberation of late-night riffs, the band essentially made it their home, where they ate, slept, and recorded. Domination, Cemetery Gates, and Cowboys from Hell catapulted Dimebag's brutally soulful music into the global consciousness and catapulted Pantera onto the metal map. Pantera released Vulgar Display of Power, 1992, 2 years later, and it is generally considered the groove metal manifesto. In Walk, Dimebag created a riff that used only 4 notes yet was heavy as hell in metal history. Nonetheless, for fundamental blows that hit deep and wide. His solo, Meantime, took a startlingly gentle and melancholy turn in this relationship, a sudden shift from aggressiveness to unfiltered emotion that astonished ears. Dimebag demonstrated that metal guitar could be both a shout and a cry. Far Beyond Driven broke all records in 1994. The Billboard 200 charted its debut at number 1. Was the most heavily acclaimed record in United States history to achieve this feat during the grunge era. Dimebag championed raw, unpolished metal. His skill in channeling rage into structured musical force was on full display in songs like I'm Broken, Becoming, and 5 Minutes Alone, where every riff was like a slab of steel that had been tempered in fire. As a result, shadows are always cast by the spotlight. During the recording of 1990's Access The Great Southern Trendkill, Pantera started to break up. Phil Anselmo, emotionally and physically separated from the Abbott brothers, recorded vocals independently in his Louisiana studio. Coldness was setting in to the connection. One of Dimebag's most dramatic works, Floods, features a lengthy, haunting solo and features tremolo picking that yelled harmonic squeals that felt like screams for aid, rather than calming the tension. The 2000 release of Reinventing the Steel, Pantera's last album, was an attempt to revive the metal for metalheads vibe and get back to the band's origins. However, Pantera had already fragmented by that point. Dimebag and Vinny were burdened by a broken history, while Anselmo was engrossed in other ventures. After years of unending strife following September 11, Pantera secretly disbanded in 2003. Not a goodbye, not a last performance. A chilly stillness now occupies the space where warm recollections once thrived. The news broke Dimebag's heart. His loved ones knew he was silent, but they also realized that Pantera had been his heart and had now stopped pounding. He merely stated, "I put my heart into Pantera," in a condensed interview. Then, out of nowhere, it vanished. Silence reigned. My guitar and I were alone. A new chapter, a hopeful rebirth, was born when Dimebag and Vinny, after months of soul-searching, found a damage plan. That wasn't the next step. Totally from scratch, it was a fresh start. Just two brothers with guitars, drum sets, and a sense of pride knocking on studio doors, no longer the renowned Pantera adorning magazine covers. Beginning anew, much like the beginning of Pantera sounds tenure. With every chord and tempo, they performed as if their very survival rested on it, and above all else, on the faith that their devoted audience would never stop coming out to see them perform. For Dimebag, it was irrelevant that 2004's newfound power didn't burst like anticipated. Unfortunately, his worst nightmare came true. He stood on stage, beaming from ear to ear, playing every note as if it were his last. Nobody could have predicted that the legendary musician's life would be cut short by a gunshot during that tour, during which he gave his all to a few of devoted followers. Dimebag, who performed as if nothing were about to happen, actually did not have anything coming up. Private life. When he took the stage, Dimebag Darrell was like a lightning storm, chaotic, exciting, and impossible to stop. Behind the scenes, though, he was a devoted, funny, and loving man. To his brother, the woman he deemed his entire universe, music, and himself. Rita Haney, Dimebag's high school girlfriend, was his world for almost 20 years. A bond that is stronger and longer lasting than most vows, yet does not involve marriage or legal documentation. She was more than just his business partner. Rita was indispensable. She was Dimebag's rock, his manager in the background, and someone who saw him through every high and low point in his life. They were peers throughout their formative years. Endured hardship, hunkered down in a garage during the early days of Pantera's unnamed dream, and traveled the United States with the band on every tour bus. Despite his reputation for irresponsibility, wild behavior, and living the high life as a rock star, Dimebag never betrayed Rita. He never missed a night calling home and, according to his friends, he always carried her photo. He would casually smile and respond, "I found the right one early," if asked about love in interviews. Where else could one seek? The unwavering relationship between Dimebag and his brother Vinnie Paul was an integral aspect of his private life. They supported each other emotionally, going beyond being mere bandmates. The two helped each other up when one of them fell. The other subdued the furious one. They were in it together for the long haul, through the pain of Pantera's split, and now they're back stronger than ever with Damage Strategy. The goal is not to get notoriety. However, due to the fact that they were completely dependent on one another in music. In the eyes of his musical peers and friends, Dimebag wasn't an indestructible icon. He was known for his steady hand and video camera, which he used to record hilarious antics on stage and in the dressing room. His practice of giving out bottles of whiskey to strangers and embracing them tightly as if they were long-lost relatives made him famous. Music, in Dimebag's view, was about more than simply making noise. It was also about bringing people together via shared experiences like laughing, a drink, and an embrace. For that reason, the metal community as a whole mourned his death as if it were the loss of a brother. Since Dimebag wasn't merely a musician, but also the kind of friend you'd never met but felt an undeniable bond with. Everyone who has ever spent even a little time in Dimebag Darrell's company has the same story to tell. Even if you weren't important, he could make you feel that way. A tragic death and many questions remain. In real life, Dimebag Darrell had strong relationships, while leading the life of a defiant musician known for his intense, hammering riffs. Beneath the hard exterior of his metal music was a gentle, compassionate spirit who loved without reservation, lived entirely for his friends, and was incredibly protective of them. Perhaps it was due to the fact that that heart was never closed or protected. The world was left breathless by his unexpected, terrible, and senseless death, which did not have any borders. Dimebag and his new band, Damage Plan, performed for an audience of about 250 people at the El Rosa Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio, on the evening of December 8, 2004. His guitar was barely strumming as he began to play when a towering man in a gray hoodie sprang over the barrier, drew a revolver, and fatally murdered Dimebag right then and then. As his bandmates and hundreds of horrified fans watched on, he fell to the ground. His brother Vinnie Paul was also there. Before authorities were able to shoot down the gunman, he kept shooting and killed 3 more people. It was too late for Dimebag, too. At the age of 38, he passed away on stage, amidst the sounds of music in anguish. A chilling ripple ran across the whole music scene as a result of Dimebag's untimely demise. People all over the world were asking, why him? Was a guitarist who was blameless, untarnished, generous, and unflappable killed in cold blood? The days that followed saw no lessening of sorrow but rather a worsening of it, along with an influx of questions that nobody could find satisfactory answers to. The murderer, 25-year-old Nathan Gale, was a former Marine with a history of schizophrenia. His friends and mom said he frequently demanded that Pantera pay him for the songs he had stolen. However, what really frightened onlookers was Gale's meticulous execution of the act, careful, well-planned, and surprisingly effortless. Without a pat-down, he walked armed into the club. Nobody was there to stop him, and there weren't even metal detectors or adequate security. It appeared that his attack was not spontaneous. It was cold, premeditated, and as quick as an execution. And the rumors started flying, like they do when a legend dies. Some thought Dimebag's ongoing feud with ex-Pantera vocalist Phil Anselmo, who had previously informed the press that Dimebag deserves to be hit in the face, was the real motivation for Gale's actions. Vinny and the rest of the Abbott family never forgave Anselmo, even when he eventually apologized, claiming his comment was angry and a sign of his genuine anguish over Dimebag's death. They remained silent for the remainder of their lives. They had transformed the agony into stone. On the other hand, some adhered to wilder and worse conspiracy theories, such as the idea that Dimebag's death was pre-programmed into Gale's mind during his military service. Although there was a lack of concrete proof, it could not be dismissed as the irrational behavior of a lunatic either. In the rock world, Dimebag's funeral was like a royal farewell. From unknown fans to legendary figures, thousands gathered to pay their respects. As a symbol of passing the legacy, Eddie Van Halen transferred the original Bumblebee guitar, the one shown on Van Halen 2, to Dimebag's coffin. He claimed that Dimebag was the only one who deserved to die with this instrument. 2 words are carved into his tombstone. Pulled the getcha. It wasn't a philosophy. Dimebag's trademark remark went every time he lifted a glass, smiled, or stepped onto a stage. Living that way was the norm. Be generous to all people you encounter and live life to the fullest. They may have seized his physical form, but they would never be able to destroy his soul. Even though Dimebag Darrell has passed on, the sound of his guitar echoes through the universe. That man who played as if there were no tomorrow, and who actually had none, lives on in every riff, in every broken heart, and in the community that, 20 years later, is still grieving his loss. Dimebag Darrell didn't create metal guitar, but he did give it a unique sound and style that has endured for decades. A feeling-based language that does not require translation. He took aim at the audience's emotions rather than their rational faculties during an era when guitarists were competing to demonstrate their technical mastery. Dimebag transformed the guitar into a voice with sledgehammer riffs and his distinctive squeals that echoed like the soul's tormented cries. The thrashing mayhem, the bouncing funk, and the bluesy expressiveness were all skillfully combined in his music. He had lightning-fast speed, but he could only use it when absolutely required. Groove, that rudimentary rhythm that could compel you to nod along regardless of your ability to comprehend the words, was his first and foremost belief. Technique was merely a means to an end for Dimebag. Feelings were the last goal. The Dean ML, a guitar with an inescapable heft, profound resonance, and a brilliant scorching tone, was one of his hidden weapons. He made the guitar Dean famous by playing it from the beginning of his career. Fans revered each Dimebag trademark model, even after he temporarily played Washburn and then returned to Dean. His renowned dive bombs sounded like primal cries slicing through mayhem, and he was also famous for employing noise gate and the Digitech whammy pedal. Dimebag maintained his bluesy spirit even though he appeared to be every inch the renegade. The likes of Tony Iommi, Eddie Van Halen, Ace Frehley, and most notably Billy Gibbons of ZZ Top were significant influences on his expressive note releases and emotive bends, according to him. That's why people can't get over songs like This Love, Cemetery Gates, and Floods. Even when he plays alone or in a fury, Dimebag's music lives on in Pantera's renowned albums like Cowboys from Hell, Vulgar Display of Power, and Far Beyond Driven, and in the thousands of young guitarists who have taken cues from him and discovered their own style. Lamb of God, Avenged Sevenfold, Trivium, and Machine Head are just a few of the modern bands that look up to Dimebag. His influence on history was undeniable, even to his detractors. Time and again, he was named by Guitar World as one of the all-time best guitarists. Among the top 10 metal guitar icons of the 20th century, according to Gibson, was him. Because Dimebag was always number one in the hearts of the metal scene, fans reacted negatively when Rolling Stone rated him as low as number 92. What matters most, though, is how he continues to be loved by his supporters, not the accolades or rankings. Dimebag is called upon, not by name, but by sound, whenever a Dean guitar is picked up or the riff from Walker Domination is played. Something never changes in the metal universe. People don't merely remember Dimebag Darrell. Every single day, millions of people replay him. Whenever his riffs erupt, there are thousands of hands raised in celebration, even though no statues have been made for him. Even though there was no official national day of mourning, a whole generation is still in grief. Amidst the chaos, there is always a peaceful spot where Dimebag, the eternal brother, is utterly and passionately called upon. Immortality and impact, Dimebag Darrell isn't there anymore, roaring with rumbling riffs, yet, in some bizarre way, his influence has only grown since he collapsed. In the memories of individuals who were left behind, rather than during live performances. It was not his demise that propelled him to legendary status. The fact that his life was a continuous riff is what made him a legend. From huge festivals to small bar events with only a handful of supporters, the metal community around the world has hosted yearly tribute concerts for Dimebag since the tragedy in 2004. Not for fame or money, but because Dimebag owes each of these musicians a piece of their soul. Musicians like Rob Flynn, Kerry King, Corey Taylor, and Dave Grohl have all played Pantera songs in his honor. A lot of musicians look up to Dimebag as the one who kept them on track. Lamb of God, Trivium, Mastodon, and Bullet for My Valentine are just a few of the modern metal bands that openly acknowledge that Pantera and Dimebag were instrumental in the genre's meteoric rise. He wasn't the most technically proficient guitarist, in their opinion. On the other hand, he did what no textbook can: he kindled the fire. The fact that Dimebag lived his life not like a celebrity but as a real brother further ensures his immortality. There was never a moment when he stood out. He was standing among them. He was not one to keep secrets. Always kept his methods under wraps and never let fame separate him from his work. Dimebag would always be happy to see you in the wings of a play, or even give you a bottle of whiskey, if you went to a bar backstage. Plus, a riff lesson on the spot if you were fortunate. His eponymous Dean ML guitars have been perennial bestsellers for years. For millions of musicians, every Dimebag trademark product, from strings and pedals to amps, has become holy gear. There's more than meets the ear in those guitars: their spirits, full of generosity, ferocity, and unwavering devotion to the music itself. Metal fans all across the globe started referring to the Paul brothers, who were born to pen one of the most epic chapters in heavy music history, as the immortal twins of groove metal after Vinnie Paul's death in 2018. Supposedly, Dime and Vinnie are reportedly still together, as if death had never separated them, and they are rearing a getcha-pole in paradise. There is no way to quantify Dimebag's impact in terms of album sales or accolades received. It's quantified by the reverberation of his presence whenever an unknown musician plays a Pantera riff or whenever a young person hears that initial screech of terror and knows, this is my sound. Music isn't what keeps Dimebag alive. Dimebag made music immortal. Nobody can ever take that away from you. Until his untimely demise, Dimebag Darrell was only a symbol, not a legend. When he was alive, he became a legendary figure. From the humble beginnings as a redhead in a Texas garage, when he grabbed his guitar, to the resounding riffs that rocked arenas across the globe, and even in the solitude of his own heart, when he played tunes that no one else could hear. Despite his brief and brutal existence, his actions had an indelible impact. In the wake of a man whose music was an expression of his honest life and love. Perhaps the most important legacy Dimebag ever left behind was the fact that, in a world where fame can consume an individual, he clung to the most precious commodity of all, himself. He departed at the most exquisite moment, as the guitar started to play, his hands still holding onto the neck and his smile unbroken. Its occurrence was despised. On the other hand, maybe he would have gone in that precise manner if given the chance. adorned with affection as I stand on stage, lost in the music. The obnoxious Darrell has gone silent. Still, he's there in every chord you pluck, every tear you cry over drowned sounds, and every head that bobs to the beat of your stride. There is powerful and more everlasting than before. How do you feel about Dimebag Darrell's journey? Post your thoughts, feelings, or a simple homage in the space provided. Because music endures and Dimebag Darrell was never completely gone, make sure to subscribe and hit like to continue delving into the lives of the greats who made indelible imprints.